Hello and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics, a Frontline update report from myself, Jonathan M.S. Pearce, for the 9th of January 2023. Let's get right to the overnight and other bits of news. And the first port of call, as always, is the Ukrainian report for the figures lost by the Russians. Of course, the usual caveats apply: propaganda accuracy. Russians don't do the same. But anyway, I find this indicative and useful. 590 personnel liquidated. That's an uptick from previous days. So things have happened yesterday. Sometimes you don't know whether that's actually figures that have come in from previous days. So it might not be actually yesterday. It might just be, now we've got validation. This many people died like 3 days ago. And it might be that it's less than fewer people than they thought, and they have to readjust accordingly. I'm not sure exactly how they calculate these figures, but anyway, 590 liquidated personnel. Now we start seeing a pretty bad day for the Russians here. 11 tanks, 17 APCs. This probably indicates collections of material being hit rather than these tanks and APCs being struck on the field, although I don't know. There'll obviously be a bit of both. 4 artillery systems, 3 MLRS. That's always good to see higher numbers of these, because artillery does so much damage to the Ukrainians that taking them out means that they won't be able to fire their volleys on Ukrainian lines. Now, 3 helicopters. That is in addition to the 2 we've seen over the last few days. So that's now 5 helicopters that the Russians have lost over the last week. We don't know the crew losses, because that would be a significant hit for the Russians in terms of capability. It's one thing losing a helicopter, but if you have a big stock of those helicopters, yes, it's going to cost you to replace them, but you can just bring out another helicopter from storage or from an airport. But if you don't have the trained pilots and crew members to hand to fly those things, then that's a big problem. So if those 5 helicopters have also lost 5 crews, that's a really, really huge dent for the Russian capability. 7 drones, 8 vehicles and fuel tanks. This is an indication that yesterday was a bad day for equipment losses for the Russians. There's no doubt about that. Of course, how accurate are those figures? Who knows? This is fascinating. The general stuff, quote, it became known that on January the 5th, 6 people were shot dead near the settlement of Christopilia who expressed a position of surrendering to the defense forces of Ukraine. Why I'm telling you this is this shows a massive difference between the Russians and the Ukrainians. If there's a potential war crime on the Ukrainian side, look, this is a news agency or a news source saying this has happened. They are looking into it. Russians, you don't hear a thing. 50,000 potential war crimes of the Russians, they haven't said a single thing. Denial, denial, denial. Ukrainians, right, okay, this has been claimed, we're looking into it. If you want to know the difference between the two sides at the moment, I would say this sums it up really quite well. If you want to, if you're wondering, which side are the better people here, this is at least some indication that if you support the Ukrainians here, you are probably on the right side. I mean, it's not, they could still cover that over if something did indeed happen. But the idea is that they recognize a moral difference. Yes, it could be a bit of a PR thing. So they're positioning themselves to appear more moral to the independent viewer than the Russians. But either way, this is a step in the right direction. Absolutely. And talking about a downed helicopter, well, what 3? On Sunday, that's yesterday, Ukrainian Air Command Center, forces of the AFU shot down a Russian Ka-52 and Orlan 10 drone. Well, there you go. There's well, I don't know whether that's hitting an Orlan drone. That's a pretty big missile to take out a drone. But there you go. That's what they're having to do at the moment. Or it could take out the Ka-52. Not sure there's any clarity of what's hit. But yeah, bad day for the Russian air defenses there. 144 strikes were carried out by the Russian army during the day on the territory of the Sumy region. So Sumy is up here, and that is being hit consistently across the border. Are they softening up Sumy for a counteroffensive, or for an offensive, not a counteroffensive? Or is that just what they do to try and fix resources into Sumy? I don't know. 13-year-old girl and 6 others have been injured in the Kharkiv region. This is because Russia have shelled the market of Shevchenkova village with S-300 missiles. I keep talking about how you're going to see more and more S-300 used in the ground-to-ground capacity because they have a shed load of these missiles. And where they're running low on cruise missiles, comparatively speaking, the Russians have a big stock of S-300s. You will see these being used a lot. Okay, going on to a report here. It's generally becoming accepted that the Russians are preparing to mobilize an extra 500,000 conscripts. I mean, this is a Ukrainian claim, but we've had various dates posited for this in January. Some saying it's going to start, I don't know, start sort of already. Some saying that, I don't know, 12th, 17th of January, lots of different ideas of when it's going to start. Some saying that actually, so here, 15th of January is the claim here. Some saying that it's actually been going on non-stop. They just haven't been shouting about it. Just get ready for this happening, and that will, no matter what you think about the quality of the conscripts, how well trained they will be, and how well equipped they will be or not, these present a problem for the Ukrainians, because as we've seen in Bakhmut, if the Russians are prepared to send waves and waves of humans at the Ukrainians, they can achieve Pyrrhic victories, yes, at a huge cost. Maybe other armies in the world wouldn't do that. Western armies, just not part of their doctrine, but the Russians have long been fine with sacrificing huge amounts of soldiers in order to make gains on the battlefield. This really interesting snapshot of Russian propaganda here. Here they say American radar for HIMARS is destroyed in Kherson Oblast. It's a HIMARS truck. It's destroyed in September. This radar is used alone for other things. I mean, the translation here is not very good. And now the truck and radar both are destroyed. The cost to the United States taxpayers is $17 million. Another victory for Russia. And there they show this HIMARS radar truck, to which Ukraine weapons tracker, not what they've said, but what they said previously is when this actually happened, it's like, this is a Russian P-18-2 2D VHF surveillance radar. It was destroyed by the Ukrainian precision striking Kherson Oblast. The P-18-2 is an upgrade of the Soviet P-18 with digital components and improved electronics. In other words, this is absolute Russian propaganda. Just nonsense. I mean, I don't know why there would be a Twitter handle. I don't know if this is a poem, whether this is just sarcastic. Ministry of Russian Propaganda. But it appears like these guys are trying to be serious, or maybe they're not. Information is 100% sure. Don't listen to the Ukrainians. I don't know. It could be a satire, but this is the sort of thing that we see quite often. Moving on. During the past 24 hours, the Russian Air Force made 17 Ukrainian Air Force, made 17 strikes on troop and equipment concentrations of the Russian fascist invaders. Okay, a bit of rhetoric there, as well as 3 strikes on the positions of anti-aircraft missile systems. And this could be, 17 strikes on troop and equipment concentrations. That translates to this. Okay, so these kind of things add up. Just to say, the Pentagon said that they will be training 500 Ukrainian soldiers a month on M2A2 Bradleys, that's really important and really that's great. But what's interesting about that is this indicates possibly that the USA is setting up a large training program and is planning to send a lot more Bradleys to Ukraine in future aid packages. Well, that would be fantastic. On the flip side, there is this. So I don't know if you've been paying attention to American politics lately, and I don't want to annoy loads of sort of pro-Republicans who are viewing this, but the reality is this. Kevin McCarthy failed a record number of times to get voted as Speaker because there's a slim majority for lawmakers in Congress on the House of Representatives. He's managed to become Speaker after huge amounts of failed attempts of the House for the Republicans. However, what was happening is many of the lawmakers on the right, on the kind of fringe MAGA side of things, like Matt Gaetz and people, were not voting for him, and so he had to make concessions to them, concessions after concession, and there's a lot of conversation going on at the moment as to exactly what he gave them in order to eventually get the votes. And there's a little bit of there's obviously some politics going on there, but I don't think it looks good for Ukraine. So one of the things, apparently, and this is according to the Telegraph, one of the things that McCarthy has agreed is to cut aid to Ukraine. So that then appeases those on the MAGA right, people like Lauren Boebert, Matt Gaetz, Marjorie Taylor Greene, people I've reported on before, who, if you are pro-Ukraine, you should not be fans of those representatives. I don't care where you sit on a political spectrum in America. If you're if you're a Republican but also pro Ukraine, there is an element of the Republican Party that is not useful to Ukraine and doesn't sit well with those who are pro Ukraine, and they appear to have gained some leverage in US politics in general, but with Kevin McCarthy here. So they eventually voted him in, but one of the things is, cutting aid to Ukraine. It's a shame. The conversation continues underneath. 2023 defense budget was already signed into law. He won't be able to change much within the financial year 2023. And that may well be true. The reply that here is that is about $800 million in the defense package, and the $45 billion package was just voted on. The direct military aid to Ukraine in that package will be used up in about 5 to 6 months based on previous aid to Ukraine since February the 24th. 2022. So the flip side is, but actually that there will be other aid packages that will happen this financial year. And it goes on. There's a big discussion on the aid packages and what the likelihood of 2023 will be. So that's worth looking into. But there's just something to watch out for, and it's a shame. It's a shame that McCarthy had to make those concessions, and it is interesting. There's almost a scuffle with other Republicans on the floor, having to go at people like Matt Gaetz, just saying they're bang out of order. And that was also interesting to see. But there you go. I'm sure I'll report on that again going forward. Right, let's get to Frontlines. Okay, we'll go to the northeast, which is Kupiansk, down to Svatove to Kreminna, and the reality is not a lot to report here. The Russians have claimed that a Su-24 was shot down, I think, somewhere in the Kharkiv region, and in around Izium, a Su-27. No, it's the other way around, I think. But certainly 2 Ukrainian jets claimed to be shot down in Kharkiv and Izium area. Whether that's 100% true, I don't know. I've not seen anything said about that by the Ukrainians. It would be really bad if that is the case. As far as what's going on in this front line, lots of positional battles, not really heard much. Makivka, just down here, north of Kreminna, or northwest of Kreminna. Makivka, some activity there. Repelled attacks, I think, stand Makivka, and Ukrainians claiming that there is fighting in Chervonopipivka. I put this as a big grey area. I'm going to move the Ukrainians back to that. Who knows? It's just backs and forwards around here. They're fighting over this gully area to the north of Chervonopipivka, between there and Ploshchanka. That has been ongoing. But other than that, not really 100% sure what is happening around there. It seems like Rebar have taken a couple of days off, ISW have taken a day off, and everyone else appears to be concentrating on Bakhmut. It seems to have taken. So if you look at all the maps here from Null Reports, they're all Bakhmut, nowhere else. Defmon says about the area, no significant change in the Svatove-Kreminna-Seversk axis. I believe that the Ukrainians are doing very slow progress in the Kreminna direction, and they have repulsed attacks around Makivka, and Bilorivka. So that's all pretty normal there. Let's indeed move down to the Bakhmut area, where it's all happening, and it's where all the news has been over the last few days. So, as we come down to Bakhmut, we come to our familiar Yakovlivka area that was initially sort of captured by the Russians, that allowed them to flank Soledar. Russians have made some pretty good advances as far as they're concerned into Solidar. Let's have a look at some of the sources before we go into some of the details. Oops, no, not that source. Uh, no report says Ukrainians regained control over the western entrance and have pushed back Wagner forces south into the housing areas along the Plotka River, confirmed from the ground. Russia is still trying to force a way in from the north and northeast. No news. Reinforcements are coming. So that's no reports, who's generally fairly positive for the Ukrainian situation. So just this is the Solidar is basically, as we'll see in a second, split into kind of three. You've got this southeastern section here. You've got a central section that moves up into this sort of mine area here. Russians are pressuring from the north and then pressuring through the center into the sort of central northern part of the town. But he seems to think that there's some success down to the south, a little bit for the southern part of the northern section, if you like, for the Russians, and the Wagner have been pushed back there. Defmon says continued fighting around Solidar situation is unclear at this point. I consider the town contested and will have to do so until new evidence appears. Absolutely. Most things at this point are rumor based, and I'm not going to make any kind of prediction based on rumors. So I'm going to try and unpick some of the claims. This is what Kenneth Gred says, who is not actually in Solidar, so you have to understand this. So he's a Swedish fighter who's out in Ukraine at the moment. I've received a lot of questions about the Kramatorsk attack. He starts talking about that, and he goes on to talk about Solidar. Let's regarding Solidar and the contradictory information coming from there. Let's first look at the structure of Solidar. The city consists of three distinct parts: the eastern part controlled by the Russians, the center, the theatre of war, and the western part where the industrial area is located. It was in the central part where we took on the Russians by using the salt mine tunnel system. So we drove the Russians out of this part and reinforced the defense line in the industrial area. The strategic importance of Solidar has also been over-dramatized in the Western media, and the tactics we used in Severodonetsk have been forgotten. Our task is to win the war and not hold a certain place just for the sake of holding it. So that is a good point, although I do think he's overcooking how well the Ukrainians are doing and where the fighting is taking place exactly. If Solidar was to fall, and also Krasnohora, it is not the end for Bakhmut, true, because we have maintenance routes from the western part. Our task is to thin out the Russians until we launch our offensive. Many have also asked about our winter attack. Okay, so that's all he says about Solidar and Russia. So here is an approximate situation in Solidar, according to a pro-Ukrainian. According to the latest geolocated footage, and that's important, Russian invasion forces have entered the center from the east and north and now hold approximately 80% of the city area, approximately 20% of the urban area. So what his map looks like is broadly what my map looks like. So that you've got Bakhmutska, and then you've got this southeastern part of Solidar and the central part now completely in the hands, I'd argue, of the Russians, and actually a lot of the northeastern part in the hands of the Russians. And in fact, there are claims that the Russians are flanked to the north and are indeed on this high ground right here. This is a rebar claim that they hold that place there. And there's a lot of talk now. If we zoom into the center before we look at a couple of the other claims, if we zoom into the center here, there is apparently, I don't know why my pins have just been moved. Literally just made them, and that pin has now gone south. Oh well. Right in the center here, this is according to Yevgeny Prigozhin himself, who's in charge of Wagner. He says there's fighting over the city council building here. So there's fierce fighting going on there. And these two roads, junction between that sort of road coming down there and this road coming across here, I think this is where there's fierce fighting as well. So right in this central part, this is the kind of, you've got mine and entrances in various locations around here, but this is more your industrial area as far as I understand it. But it looks like the Russians are making inroads, and they might have a line all the way up there. It's basically a big grey area where there's lots of fighting going on, grey zone. But yeah, it's not looking great. There have been claims that Russian forces are beginning to transfer combat units from the Bakhmut front, so all across the Bakhmut front, more towards Solidar, which, if captured, would allow them to put more pressure on the north of the Bakhmut city. And I completely understand that. If you are starting to make a success around here, and this will be key to taking some of these other northern settlements, then yeah, pile in your troops there, make hay while the sun shines, keep that momentum going. It's all about momentum, and then the Russians will eventually, hold the north here, to cut off the supply routes, and then put pressure on Bakhmut itself by a larger encirclement. Actually, it seems like they're doing fairly well everywhere. They're consolidating positions on to the east. It looks like some are claiming that the entirety of Opitny has fallen. They're making inroads just north of Klishchivka in this field area. Klishchivka is under a lot of pressure, and then you've got Kurdyumivka and Ozarianivka further down south. So I think there's a sense that the net is closing for Bakhmut, but the Ukrainians are sending in a whole bunch of reinforcements, which is a kind of implicit acceptance that this is actually a really important place. Um, there's lots of argument whether it has strategic importance, tactical importance, very locally, or just PR importance. And people on both sides sit along that spectrum somewhere. I would say it's probably got importance for all of those things. And Ukrainians clearly want to hold it for as long as possible. If the Russians do take Bakhmut by taking Solidar, by taking Pidorodne, then it will be really, really costly for them, and it might then take them out of the game for any future attacks elsewhere. So it's not the end of the world. I've said this plenty of times. It's not the end of the world if Bakhmut falls, because actually they would have exhausted themselves to be able to do much else around here. Then it's a case of, well, they've got 500,000 mobilized troops coming on the way. What can they do with all of them? And is that just their only tactic, which is throw humans at the problem? We need to take this area here. We need to take up to Seversk, from Bakhmut to Seversk. Okay, but losing Bakhmut might allow you to take Seversk. Okay, let's throw 100,000 mobilized troops at that. Okay, we've taken that, and then it might be this situation where eventually, after several months, the Russians have maybe this whole area. But in what position will they be in then? That's the key. So it's looking at the whole big picture, not just these smaller. Oh my goodness, they've lost Bakhmut, the Ukrainians. They've lost this. It may be that 5 months' time they've been able to throw these mobilized troops at all of these settlements and take them. I'm not saying that's going to happen, but just imagine. And then they would just be completely exhausted. And then the Ukrainians, backed hopefully with continued help from the West and their allies, will then say, right, and now we'll do our huge counteroffensive movement. Or they've got this huge counteroffensive movement that you might see before that, which will suck a load of those mobilized troops away to act in defensive modes, and they won't be able to make these offensive gains. So, all these things to consider. Sorry, a further source here says Russian forces are continuing to advance on the city of Solidar in eastern Ukraine, with them now controlling over 80%. The most heavy fighting is near the Salt Mine Museum, which has traded hands multiple times in the last couple of weeks. Last couple of days, really. I wouldn't say it's traded hands a lot in the last few weeks. So this is a Salt Mine Museum. I think he's talking about this area here. A couple of maps still have that as contested. Some people saying that's where fighting is still taking place. Well, it probably is. There's probably fighting going on all over the shop. You have this Ukrainian soldiers saying that reporting on the situation near Bakhmut, and of course this is just anecdotal, one person claiming this, but this soldier claims that Russians finish off their wounded instead of taking them away. So they're killing their wounded because taking them away is too difficult, takes out people to take them away. This is the argument that actually wounding a soldier is better than killing them. So if you wound a soldier on battlefield, then a couple of others have to take them away, so they can't do the fighting. Then they have to get them to help within that golden hour time frame, and you need medical logistics, you need all sorts, and then you're sucking in resources to keep this person alive, and then they are then out of fighting for the next 6 months, taking resources as well, sucking in resources to get them back to fitness and rehabilitate them. Whereas if they've just been killed, the soldiers around them can continue fighting, and all those resources aren't required to get them back to health. Now that sounds really calculated and horrible, and it is. I mean that's a situation, but there are people who say it's better to wound soldiers than to kill them for those reasons. Andrew Perpetua says yesterday, so this is now going a little bit further south. So that's broadly what's going on in Solidar. I'm sure we'll hear lots of news about that today. It'd be interesting to see whether these claims of the Russians being in the northern part on this higher ground here are true, because then they really have started to encircle Solidar, the rest of Solidar. We might see Solidar being lost over the next few days, but there are claims, people try and dress this up on the pro-Ukrainian side as well as possible, saying, "Oh, the Ukrainians have made some gains here and there." For example, here's one from Tim White reporting on a small victory reported in Bakhmut. We don't know where this is, and I'm not showing you the pictures because they show dead bodies. But Ukraine's border guard division, who we know are fighting in Solidar, took over a Russian base. They reported 18 dead Russians and 24 injured. So again, that's really positive for the Ukrainians. However, what does that say? Where is that, and what does that say about the larger situation going on? Now, Krasnohora, which is just southwest of Solidar, on the way to Pidorodny, apparently, according to some Russian sources, Russians are fighting in Krasnohora. I haven't reflected that on my map. There's still just so much. There's such a lack of clarity of exactly what's going on. The Russians are also claiming that Ukrainians have withdrawn from Krasnohora, and that might include Paraskovivka, which is just behind Krasnohora. Now, I don't know whether that's true at all, but if they have withdrawn from there, then that's really bad news for Solidar, because they're effectively giving up Solidar, because the Russians will then completely encircle, well, not completely, but largely encircle Solidar from the north, the east, and the south. Anyway, those are the claims of the Russians, and then we have claims about Pidorodny going on down here. Just to let you know, this is a pro-Russian source by the looks of it. This is what Solidar looks like now, where intense battles continue. Wagner's assault units break through the Ukrainian defense and force the Ukrainian command to transfer new troops. As you know, the demoralized fighters of the 128th Brigade have left their lines. So I don't know whether that's referring to the troops of Krasnohora sort of withdrawing. One of the areas of the work of the musicians, that's Wagner, in the city was the area of the salt mines. Now they are advancing on the positions of the Ukrainians near Arty Umsol. So but that sounds weird, because they're saying that's also saying there's lots of fighting around the salt mines, and now they're advancing on this area here. Well, actually, it should be the other way around. But there you go. So who knows exactly what's going on? It's difficult. That is definitely true. Or if we look elsewhere, we go to Pidorodny. So in Pidorodny, Russian forces came closer to the southern and even closer to the north and northeastern outskirts. Fighting is reported there. Russian claims that they have already entered Pidorodny are unconfirmed and premature. And yet Andrew Perpetua says yesterday Ukraine was forced to abandon Pidorodny, which is just north of Bakhmut. The Russians had flanked the north of the town, and while Ukraine could defend attacks from the east, they could not defend from the north, which is and I haven't reflected this on my map, because actually I just need some more sources to confirm this, but that is to say that Pidorodny was attacked from the north and northeast. So this red line really is across these fields, and that would make sense actually, because if they are, it is the Russians saying that they're attacking Krasnohora more than the Ukrainians, but if the pro-Ukrainian source of Andrew Perpetua is saying that Pidorodny has been entirely lost, then it just has to look something like this. And Krasnohora, I guess, if I'm going to reflect the Russian claims here, then these are at the very least the Russian claims, which is either Krasnohora has been completely taken or they're fighting in it, in which case the Russians are there. And then if Andrew Perpetua is correct, then this attack from the north has taken Pidorodny. So there you go. Others will have it as contested. We will see. So I said I haven't reflected my maps, but actually let's. So that to me reflects the fact that you've got competing claims about Pidorodny there. That is a real problem, though, Pidorodny going, because, as I've said many times, that is yet another key to the north of Bakhmut. In fact, I was saying the reason why Solidar is important, because if Solidar falls, Krasnohora falls, if Krasnohora falls, then Pidnorodny falls. Well, actually, Pidnorodny could fall before them all if those claims are indeed correct. Okay, to continue with no reports here, Bakhmut, Russian forces are somewhat improved their position near Ivangrad. Most of Opitny is considered under Russian control, although the road to Bakhmut is an open field and under fire control. Russia can hardly move without being seen. Russia attacked near the art winery. Okay, let's make some sense of that. So as we come down here, there's Russian fighting around the art winery, which is basically around here. That's the art winery there. So they have really, it seems like, solid control now over Patrice Lumumbi Street here, and further claims now that they are successfully controlling Maximienko Street. No claims in the last day about the garbage waste disposal or sorting plant. But Ivangrad and Opitny seem to be pretty firmly under the control, or at least largely under the control of the Russians here. Quite how far Opitny goes here before it turns into Bakhmut, some commentators have said that it's just unsure. So when they say they control Opitny, it's difficult to know where to draw the lines. No report seems to indicate that it's fine getting into Bakhmut still, that this area is under fire control from the Ukrainians. So if the Russians do want to cross here and move up there, they will be seen. It's difficult. However, I have said that it makes life difficult for Klishchivka if they are, successfully being flanked to the north, and there is pressure. They're at least able to put pressure on the very southern outskirts of Bakhmut. So things are again looking difficult. No reports says about Klishchivka and Kurdyamivka. Near Klishchivka and Kurdyamivka, Russia has increased its attacks. So again, even greater intensity here, even though we're hearing they're pulling troops possibly to Solidar. Well, I guess that's from the whole Bakhmut front rather than these individual places. Their goal is to reach Ivanivska as soon as possible to envelop Bakhmut. Russian sources claim that Russians broke through towards Delivka, but this is very unconfirmed and much like rumors. So again, if we come down here, we have Delivka here, Zenopilia, Kurdyamivka, and Ozeryanivka. So the idea is the claims that the Russians are making, they've broken through some defenses and are approaching Delivka. Again, if that's true, then there are just gains taking place everywhere around Bakhmut. And I would always err on the side of caution. I would say that Bakhmut front is not looking good at the moment. The Ukrainians are under heaps of pressure pretty much everywhere. And they're going to find it hard to hold on to Bakhmut if Bakhmut is entirely surrounded. Yes, they can hold out there for a long time. You look at Mariupol, you look at what happened to some extent in Severodonetsk. They can hold out, but at some point they're going to have to weigh up the cost of holding out as opposed to just pulling out and doing the same maybe in Chasiv Yar, just moving the lines further back. How would this affect attempts of moving towards Siversk, which is a pretty important place logistically, and so on and so forth. So, and then how does that affect the Ukrainian attempts to take Kreminna? If you're starting to have to watch your back here as the Russians can move upwards, then yeah, that's potentially a problem. Okay, that's enough time on Bakhmut. We'll watch it today closely, see what happens. Let's move further down south. Just before I go down south, here's a War Mapper's nice, clear, colourful map of the kind of central Bakhmut area. Pressure from Opitny. We've got your contested area down here. We've got contested area right on south, but doesn't have Maximienko Street under, Russian control here, so that's interesting. Although has Russians making inroads just north of the art winery that we talked about, so slightly different kind of mapping going on there. I would think that there is Russian presence on this road because that many sources are claiming it to be the case. Anyway, as we come further down south, oops, what am I doing? Let's go to my map. There really isn't very much to report other than that there is fighting. There is fighting in certain places. I think Zalizny here towards there. We've got fighting around Vodyane, Pervomaisky, normal stuff. This is around Avdivka. Both sides reporting fighting there. We've got fighting towards Krasnohorivka, which is on the way to Mariinka, and fighting obviously in Mariinka, which is like a complete hellscape. Fighting around Pobyeda, which the Russians would like to be able to flank to the south to bypass Mariinka, but actually Pobyeda is causing them a bit of a headache, and they're unable to get past it at the moment. Claims from both sides that there's attacking going on in Novomyrkylivka, so make of that what you will. And then there is quite a bit of shelling and whatnot going on around this whole sort of region, Vuhledar included. So let's just have a look at a source here. So in the Volnovaka direction, periodic artillery shelling of Vuhledar and the surroundings of Vodyane, Prishtivka, and Bohoyavlenka was recorded. No one was injured. Head of Donetsk Regional Military Administration report. So, yeah, usual kind of shelling that's going on there. But other than that, not too much to report in terms of actual fighting. And so we can sort of zoom out and come to just have a quick look at the Kimburn Peninsula again. I reported yesterday, I think in my extra that I did in the middle of the night last night, it was very late, it was scheduled to be published, that there is report of fighting going on there, the front lines are there. Honyuk, who reports in this area, has said that the situation in Kimburn Spit, according to the spokesman in the south, is difficult. The weather does not facilitate the easy completion of freeing it. Russian troops are still present there and don't stop attacking the right bank. So that's to say that they are attacking the right bank from there, but it also seems to indicate that there's fighting going on there. I don't know if fighting means artillery. We haven't yet cleared it out, which means, to me, that speaks that there is Ukrainian presence here and they are fighting. But they're pretty good at keeping operational security tight in that area. So who knows? Anyway, that's a frontline update for today. It's almost entirely about Bakhmut. That's the nature of the beast at the moment. Not too much activity elsewhere. Thank you so much for your support. Please like, subscribe, and share. Thanks to all my members. Thanks to all the people who pop along to uasupporter.com/ATP and grab some stash from there. That's to show your support for Ukraine. I get a little bit of commission, so that's fantastic. And thanks to all the kindness that you show me. Take care, and I'll hopefully see you later or speak to you later.